I know that my Redeemer lives. I know that over yonder stands a place prepared for me. A home, a house that made with hands most wonderful to see. I know that my Redeemer lives. I know eternal life He gives. I know that my Redeemer lives.
Thank you, Neil. Good morning. It's nice to see all of you today. If you're visiting with us, I hope that you will find this to be a very warm and welcoming church, and if it's not, please talk to Paco afterwards. You can talk to me. We're heading into the home stretch of our series, Believe. The first 10 lessons were focused on what, as Christians, we should think. How should we use our brain to think about God? What are the basic doctrines and beliefs of the Christian life? So we talked about God, we talked about Jesus, we talked about the Holy Spirit, salvation. We moved from the head to the hands, and we began to think about what are the practices that a Christian should demonstrate? What are the things that a Christian should do? So we talked about things like worship and prayer and how I can use my resources to give to God and to others. And now we're entering into the last of the 10 lessons of this series, Believe. And we're focusing, we've moved from the head to the hands, and now we're going to the heart. Because we don't start with the heart, because these other practices help produce the kind of person that we want to be. And what we're going to be looking at are 10 different virtues or characteristics that should accompany every Christian. These 10 lessons, for the most part, are going to come out of what Paul talks about in Galatians chapter 2, verse 22 and 23, when he says, the fruit of the Spirit. So let me read Galatians 5, 22 and 23, and then we'll talk a little bit about this idea of fruit, and then we'll jump into our first lesson today, which is love. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. These are the things that should demonstrate that we have God in our lives. Now it's interesting that he says the fruit, and in Greek this is a singular word, the fruit, not the fruits. How many fruits of the Spirit are there? There's one. But he just mentions 9 things. Each one of us are very complex individuals, and depending on what the question is, we're going to answer in a very different way. One of the more challenging questions when I meet someone for the first time, one of the most challenging questions for me to answer is, where are you from? Because I really don't know what they're asking. It sounds like a very innocent question, right? Where are you from? Well, I don't know whether they mean you don't look like you're from around here. Where were you born? Who was your mom and your daddy? I say, well, I can tell you half of the question, or I can respond to half of that. I was born in Korea. But the question might not be where were you born, it might be where were you raised? I'm trying to listen to your accent in English and figure out what part of the United States are you from. You're obviously not from the South. Doesn't sound like you're from the North. I said, well, I'm kind of in the middle. I was raised in D.C. The question might be, where did you learn to speak Spanish? And the answer to that question would be Argentina, when we lived there as missionaries. Now, totally different answers to every question, but it's still one person, still me. I'm not different, it's just there's different aspects. And so this fruit of the Spirit is one It is the presence or the evidence of the presence of God in the life of a believer. It is what God planted in us when we were baptized and we received the gift of the Spirit. It's what Joyce Meyer refers to as the seeds that God put in our heart when we were converted and when we came to faith. You see, when we were baptized and when we became Christians, we made the decision to live our life for God. We didn't immediately become loving and patient and kind. Those things have to develop and grow. And that's the second thing, that this fruit, which is the evidence of God's presence in our life, is of the Spirit. It's not the fruit of Jim. It's the fruit of God. And He is the one who produces it in my life. But before we think that we're off the hook then, if God is the one who's in control of doing it, it's important to point out that this is a collaboration. We can water that seed. We can prune and cut parts of the growing plant that's in our heart so that certain aspects of our life don't grow. I have a tree in our patio that if it were allowed to grow naturally, it would grow equally on both sides. But I've put that tree up against a wall and a barrier. So that tree only grows on one side. Now, it fits my purpose perfectly. It's exactly what I want. Because I don't have enough room for the tree to sit in the middle of the patio, I want it off to one side. So I have intentionally caused it to be deformed. That's not how the tree should grow if it was left to its own devices. There are ways that we can deform this fruit of the Spirit that's growing in us due to our actions. There's ways that we can position ourselves in life and the decisions that we make, that God is trying to create this fruit of the Spirit in us, and we put the plant of kindness up against the wall and it doesn't grow healthy. So this is a joint relationship, God working in and through us. And the very first thing he mentions as the summary and as the overall characteristic of God in our lives is love. It's not really a surprise to us, I don't think. If you think of what one word would best describe God's nature, I think we would probably say God is love. That's what this text tells us. He's many other things, but the thing that comes up over and over and over is that God is love. A couple years back, we did a series based on a book called The Jesus Practices. And what the author of the book did was went through the Gospels and made a chart of every time Jesus did something and then organized them into 8 different practices that Jesus did. The thing that Jesus did more than any other thing, even teaching, the thing that Jesus did the most was heal. When you just go through the Gospels, that was the action that he displayed more often than any other. The second was love, along with the kindness, mercy, and compassion that he showed everyone around him. When someone asked Jesus what the greatest commandment was, we tend to say, and Jesus said, there's 2. The first is love God, and the second is love your neighbor. But if you think about it, it's only one command, love. The most important command, the greatest command, is to love. How can I know if I love God? Keep my commandments, Jesus says. And what is the most important commandment? Love. And so we end up with love being the very nature of God, the thing that Jesus does among the things that he does almost more than anything else while he's on this earth. It's the command that God gives us, and it's how I know whether I'm really living the Christian life, that I have the presence of God in my life. But over the years, even back in early Christian days, people have kind of harped on different things to demonstrate that a person had the presence of God in their life. In Corinth, this ancient city in Greece, they had kind of gravitated on this thing of speaking in tongues. That became the most important thing. You really don't have God if you don't have the ability to speak in tongues. I remember working with a young man in Buenos Aires, and I worked with the youth. I was a lot younger then, and so it seemed like a good fit. And so we're talking, and he starts crying. And I'm trying to figure out, he went to another church, and I'm just trying to figure out where he's coming from and what's going on. And he says, I don't know why God hates me. I don't even remember the young man's name, but I said, well, why do you think God hates you? Because I can't speak in tongues. I thought, why would you think that that means God hates you? Well, because in my church, if you don't speak in tongues, you're not a real Christian. And they had fallen into the trap that the Corinthians had fallen into and specified one aspect of the spiritual gifts at that time and had highlighted that as the number one thing that demonstrates that you're a Christian. Now, before we get too hard on them, we might do it a little bit different. We might say you're not a real Christian unless, and I don't know what you would put in the blank, unless you have certain doctrines in correct order. You're not a real Christian unless you worship as we do, weekly observance of the Lord's Supper. You're not a real Christian unless... But what's interesting is, in John 13, and what Paul's going to say here in 1 Corinthians 13, you're not a real Christian unless you love. That's how you tell whether you have the presence of God in your life. After he talks about these various gifts, in chapter 12, verse 31 of 1 Corinthians, Paul says, and now I will show you the most excellent way. Now, that word way doesn't mean that much to us in today's world because we're used to not describing the church with that phrase, the way. But if you go back to the book of Acts and you read through and you write down what did the early church call themselves and what did other people call them, you'll find that Luke, the author of Acts, uses the way more than he uses any other description in the book of Acts. Luke never refers to this group of believers as the Church of Christ. Luke never refers to these believers as the church in a predominant way. But numerous times he says, these of the way. And what that describes is a movement. It describes a path where you're on a journey and you have a beginning point and you have an end point. And it describes development and growth. It describes a lifestyle, much like the disciples who followed after Jesus, these apprentices that lived with Jesus and slept in the same open fields where he would sleep, or by the side of the road, would eat the same food that he would eat, would watch him do the miracles, would sit at his feet. Disciples in the old days were ones that were connected with their rabbi and went wherever the rabbi went. The way. And we've separated from that idea. And so Paul is trying to make a point by choosing this word. He's saying that love is more than a quality that we should add to our life. It's more than a virtue. It's more than something we do to get what we want. It is a lifestyle. Love should be our defining attribute. Love should be the way that we live. And it gets real complicated for us because we don't use love in that same way. We love all kinds of things in life. We can love ice cream. We can love our football, basketball, hockey team. We can love our spouse. We can love God, all in the same breath. But for Greeks, they had different words for love, and their language a little more precise. When they wanted to talk about sexual or erotic love, they would use the word eros. When they wanted to talk about the love that would exist in a family between parents and children, and even for the pets in the home, they would use the word storge. If they wanted to talk about love between fishing buddies or ladies that like to do things together, this deep friendship that you've had with someone that goes back to, say, even high school and beyond, when they wanted to talk about that kind of love, they would use the word philos. But when they wanted to talk about the love that God has, none of those words were adequate. So they found a word that meant what they wanted, but interestingly enough, nobody used that word. They found this word, agape, or agape. And they said, that's the word, because this agape is a disinterested love. It doesn't focus on receiving, it focuses on giving. It's concerned about what is truly best for the other individual. And they say, that's the kind of love God has. In the ancient Greek world, nobody talked about that kind of love. But Paul grabs that word, and that is the word used throughout the New Testament to describe the love that God has for us, and also the love we should have for one another. And it appears some 320 times in our New Testament. It's a love that focuses more on giving than on getting. And what that means is that love is not, in a biblical sense, love is not a feeling. It's a decision. It's not an emotional reaction to something when someone does something nice to you, or when you eat something and it makes you feel good, or when your team wins and you feel this sense of euphoria. Love is a behavior. It's a way of acting. It's a way of living. Now, there's two opposites to love. Might seem strange that there's two. But since love is a decision for the best of the person, one opposite of love would be to decide to do nothing. Apathy, indifference, is the opposite of love, because love acts. Indifference and apathy is passive and watches without acting. And then the other opposite of love would be to act, but in a way that creates harm, creates division, that would demonstrate violence in some sort of fashion against yourself or someone else. And that would be against the concept of love, because love acts, but for the best interest of the individual. So Paul describes this kind of a love in 1 Corinthians 13, this most excellent way, this lifestyle. And the first thing he does in chapter 13, verses 1 through 3, is to emphasize that if we don't have love, we are nothing. Now that's hard for us to believe. That's not true. We're not nothing. But Paul says in terms of our impact and our testimony, and in terms of how we are to live in this world, if I don't have love, a whole lot of what I'm doing just really doesn't count. Doesn't add up. I can have the best doctrine in the world and not have love and be nothing. I can have the best programs and the best ministries, but if I'm not doing it out of love and I don't demonstrate love, I'm really not anything. If I speak in the tongues of men and angels but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and I have a faith that can move mountains, but I have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is truly the way, and the most excellent way. And then he describes what love looks like. Verses 4 through 7. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongdoings. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. Love never fails. To help capture what Paul is saying, we know God is love. and Jesus is God, so we can take the word love out and replace it with Jesus and see if that works. So then it reads, Jesus is patient. Jesus is kind. Jesus does not envy. Jesus does not boast. He is not proud. Jesus is not rude. He is not self-seeking. He is not easily angered. He keeps no record of wrongdoings. Jesus doesn't delight in evil but rejoices with the truth. Jesus always protects. Jesus always trusts. Jesus always hopes. Jesus always perseveres. Jesus never fails. And that's pretty impressive. That works. Now it gets complicated. Because if I am a Christian, which means I follow the Christ, if I am a believer, which means I believe in Jesus with all of my heart, soul, mind, and strength, if I am a person that has the Spirit of God dwelling in me, then I should be able to replace Jesus with my name. And now it gets ugly. I can't even hardly read through this without either getting so embarrassed or laughing. And some of you who know me will laugh with me. Jim is patient. There we go. It's over. I mean, we don't even get past the very first one. And I'm not even going to say anything if my kids and well, my wife is here, but and she's not going to say anything either because she loves me. Jim is patient. Jim is kind. Jim, see, I'm getting embarrassed reading this. Jim does not envy. Jim does not boast. Jim is not proud. Jim is not rude. Is not self-seeking. Jim is not easily angered. Jim does not keep record of wrongs. How I wish this were true. But see, all of a sudden now, this very beautiful love poem gives me an idea of where is Jim not being a loving person. So how do I, and how do you, and how do we become more loving people? Well, you can do random acts of kindness. You can pay for someone's coffee. You can do, like we do sometimes, we've done on Be the Church Day, we've gone out and picked up trash, we've cleaned up the marina, we've done different kind of things, painted someone's home. We could do kind of these acts that demonstrate that we care. And those are all very good and they need to continue. But let me suggest that you're not really going to grow in love unless you focus on your relationships with two groups of people. The first, the people you love, and second, the people you hate, or the people you can't stand, if hate's too strong a word for you. Let's start with the first. How can you be a more loving person? Make a list of the names of the people closest to you. Get out a sheet of paper, go home this afternoon, make a list. Beside each person's name, write why you love that person. And don't focus on yourself. They make me look good. It's like, there's a lot of people that like to hang out with me because it makes them look skinny. See, that doesn't work. Focus on them. What is it that you appreciate about them? And that should be pretty easy if it's someone that you love and care for, that you're close to. Then write down the ways that you have hurt that person. Because you see, the people that are closest to us are the easiest to love, but they're also the easiest to hurt. And think about what words you have said, what actions you have done, what attitudes you've demonstrated. And not only that, but think of the ways that you have withheld love from that person. Because you're mad, you're not going to cook them dinner, or you're not going to take out the trash, or you're not going to do something because you're just frustrated with them. You withhold love. And begin with that list. And look for opportunities to express your appreciation to that person. Tell them what they mean to you, and then apologize for the ways that you have not shown them love. These are people who are close to you. Now we get a second sheet of paper. You might even want a whole notebook. Make a list of the people that you can't stand, that have hurt you in some way. Beside each name, write down what you don't like about that person or what they have done to hurt you. probably pretty easy. We remember the hurts. Once you've done that and you've used up, however many pages of paper, go back and now write what you have done to hurt that person. Oh, no, but they did it first. That doesn't work here. What did you do to hurt that person? How have you acted in a way? What were your behaviors? What were your actions? How have you withheld love from this person? Because Jesus says that we shouldn't reciprocate love to people that love us. We should give love to everyone, the people who love us and the people who don't. And once you've prayed through that list, look for opportunities to forgive and ask for forgiveness. You see, we just don't automatically become more loving people. You can't just spend more time in church and then all of a sudden be more loving. Because love is a decision, and you have to approach it from a very intentional, deliberate path. It requires change. And as we think through how we are not loving to the people we love and the people we don't, we'll be able to identify how we can be more giving and how we can demonstrate true love. I read a book by Dale Galloway a number of years ago, as we had to do it in our urban church planting class, and it's entitled Dream a New Dream. And in the book, Dale tells this story about little Chad. Chad was a quiet, shy kid, and everybody kind of knew he always lagged behind the other kids. Nobody seemed to play with him much, but he was a very positive kid. And so he comes home shortly before Valentine's and tells his mom that he wants to make a Valentine for every single kid in his class. His mom's thinking, I wish he wouldn't do that. He's going to get his hopes up. He's going to get his heart broken. But he was insistent, so she went and bought all the materials, and they spent 3 weeks every night making Valentines for all the different kids in his class. Made 35 Valentines. Well, Valentine's Day came, February 14th, and Chad was just so excited. He grabbed all the Valentines and just bolted out the door. His mom was thinking, this poor kid. So she'd already planned on making him some chocolate chip cookies when he came home and have a nice cold glass of milk ready for him. And so she was looking out the window all afternoon just waiting for him to walk home. And then she saw the other kids, and they were all laughing and having a good time and kind of looking at their Valentines, and Chad was all by himself walking behind them. He was walking a little faster than normal, and she fully expected him to come in and just burst into tears. His arms were empty. He didn't have any cards. And when the door opened, she choked back her tears and said, Mommy has some warm cookies and milk for you. He didn't hear the words. He just marched right in, and all he said was, not a one. Not a one. And her heart sank. And then he added, I didn't forget a single one. Not a single one. See, Chad, at his young age, had captured what true love is. It's about giving and not getting. And when we can focus on how can we give love, rather than thinking on how we can receive love, then we will begin to experience new relationships and divine relationships in our marriages, our homes, and even in our community and church. I appreciate very much your attention today. If there's something that's in your life that you need to unburden, if there's some way we can pray for you, if there's a spiritual situation you're wrestling with and you need to draw close to God and you want the seed of the Spirit to be planted in your heart so that you can demonstrate this fruit, we're going to sing and would invite you to come to the front, and we'll be here to receive you. Thank you.
9:24. Yes,